Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Courtney and I showed up looking like twinsies tonight. We're both wearing our red sweatshirts. We got our hair in our low ponies. I mean, it was really cute. I mean, I just wish you guys could see us right now.
We didn't plan it at all. We've
No.
not sent any snaps of our faces or like what we're wearing,
or clothing or
just have
anything.
fun.
So I want to know if you guys okay, so I feel like you go through a stage when you're younger where it's like cool to like match your friends. And then you go through that stage where like it's horrifying to like show up matching your friends. And then you get back into that stage where you like matching your friends again. But I feel like I just kind of always stayed in the phase of liking to match my friends. And I want to know where you guys land on that.
So what is the phase where you don't like to match your friends?
Wait, is that you? Because I feel like we're
No, I'm saying like I can't remember a time where I was ever like horrified to be
you're
wearing.
asking like the
Unless
age.
like
Like preteeny, like
yeah.
10 to 13, 14-ish, I would say.
Also, I did also think it is really bad to match your friends accidentally if you're going out. Like if you're going out and you're trying to get you a man, or a woman, and like you and your girl show up in the same dress and she looks a little bit better in it.
Bitch, that dress gotta go.
Yeah.
We'll put you in a trash bag tonight.
Yeah. So I feel like that would be like, I don't want to match my friends unless you're doing it intentionally, like an accidental matching. If you're like both out single trying to go out, there might be a little like weirdness, but.
And I think it depends too on like, are you wearing like the exact same outfit, or do you have like, the same shoes or the same earrings or like just, one random little like matchy kind of thing versus like, we're wearing literally the exact outfit, like twins, like you would do when you're like 6,
I will say in 8th grade, me and my best friend at the time did frequently match.
Yeah. Same. Like I said, I've never been one that was like had a problem with matching. I'm like, yes, I will wear the same clothes as you.
I was in marching band. I had to match everybody.
That was the vibe we had going on there. You didn't have a choice.
There was no choice.
He's cutting up a pineapple. That's what he's doing. He's cutting up a fucking pineapple at 9 p.m. Because I'm guarantee you he's doing it because he can't run his Ninja Creamy because it's so damn loud that would show up, and now he can chop his little pineapple. I might leave all this in. My husband is very bad about doing things while we're recording. So we started recording late at night so that he would be quiet, but he still is not. So hopefully you guys just hear my random ramblings and not the actual background noise, and you'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? But I feel like Zoom has made that better too, where you don't hear it as much. It's a little more muted and kind of faint. But I had something else I was going to say. So a few years ago, and a few at this point has been like 8 because we're old. My boss and I matched on like 3 different occasion,
like a Cajun chicken wrap.
We bought the same Cajun chicken. No. So on like 3. What's wrong with me? Like 3 different occasions, we had like complete outfit, and it was like a striped shirt of like this, or no, it was a colored shirt, and then it was like a striped skirt of like different color, but like the exact set, like that we were wearing the same. What am I trying to say? There were like 3 different colors in the skirt, and we both chose like the exact same shade and the exact color. That it was just a very wild matching outfit.
I feel like I remember this picture that you guys took a picture on one of the occasions, like
100%,
and it was a very specific outfit.
Exactly. Like it wasn't like we're both wearing jeans and a white top. Like it was like a very like, you guys had to have planned this, and we're like, I promise I did not. But it was hilarious when she like walked in my office that morning, and we're just like, what? But it happened like 3 other times. But that was the most like specific. That wasn't just a generic, easy to match outfit. This just went off the rails. I don't even know where I was going with this. It just started because we showed up matching. Anyway, we do have some updates and a long episode, so I feel like we should just get into it.
Oh, I'll go first on the updates. Sorry, guys. Just bear with me through this long episode. Your girl struggling. She's getting old.
Courtney's coming off hangover. Yep. Courtney's coming off of a 48-hour hangover over here, guys.
That's what happens when your ass decides to drink half a bottle of rum on a fucking Sunday night.
Oh boy.
Okay. Anyway, so on Wednesday, April 12th, a man walked into the Old National Bank in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. 5 were killed and 8 were injured. The victims were Joshua Barrick, Deanna Eckert, Thomas Elliott, Juliana Farmer, and James Tutt. The shooter was a former employee of the bank. He used an AR-15 style rifle and live streamed the attack. So I did see some articles. They are going to test him for CTE because apparently he had like some, I think 3 concussions when he was younger. So they're wondering if that had something to do with it. He was killed by the police during the attack. An officer was also shot during the attack in the head, and he had just been sworn in 10 days beforehand. He is in the hospital, but they said he was in stable condition, critical but stable. And then 3 days later in Louisville on April 15th, another shooting occurred at Chickasaw Park, leaving 2 dead, 28-year-old Diaj Goodman and 17-year-old David Huff, and 4 were injured. It happened around 9 p.m. There was like hundreds of people outside because it was great weather this weekend. You know, everyone just enjoying the start of spring. And unfortunately, police have still not identified the gunman. They still don't know who did it.
Yeah.
So if you happen to live in Louisville and know who did it, like, please tell the police immediately.
Yeah. And if you live in Louisville, please be careful, apparently, because the fuck? Like,
and I think there was another shooting on April 12th as well at like a college nearby that was completely unrelated. So this was very scary for me because the Old National Bank shooting occurred about not even a mile from where 4 of my employees currently work. So it was very scary waiting to hear back from all of them that everyone was okay. Because, you know,
absolutely.
You never know with, you know, when it first happens in those early details. So,
yeah. And also this week, 84-year-old Andrew Lester shot 16-year-old Ralph Laurel when he knocked on his door. So Ralph is a Black teenager who was trying to pick up his brother from a friend's house, and he just like knocked on the wrong door, like he got the address wrong. And so the homeowner, Andrew Lester, came out, shot him on his front porch, and told him not to come back around there. Yeah. So Ralph then had to go to 3 nearby homes before someone would help him. So like you have this bleeding teenager like knocking on your door, and you have to go to 3 different houses before somebody will help you. So Ralph has been released from the hospital. So he is recovering at home. It does seem like he's going to be okay. And Lester has been charged with first-degree assault and armed criminal action. There are no hate crime charges against him at this time, but hopefully those will be coming because I mean, this is very clearly a hate crime. Like, I don't know how else to.
I mean, it is not like he was trespassing. I guess your definition of trespassing, but he came up on the front,
he knocked on the door.
I saw on one video, like he rang the doorbell, like he was trying to contact the homeowner. It wasn't like he was sneaking into his backyard which again, I don't really think warrants shooting someone just for being on your property, but that's a different story.
But it's like, you're going to shoot your mailman for trespassing, for bringing you your mail? Like, how is this any different?
Yeah. Like, he was just coming up and had just gotten the wrong door and was just you could have just been like, no, I'm sorry, you have the wrong house, or just not answered at all. And he probably would have walked away because he'd have been like, well, that's weird. Like,
yeah. Like, literally, like, your first instinct is to open the door and shoot this person. Like, that makes 0 sense. Why in the world would you do that? But at least he is going to be okay. So that is a little glimmer of hope there. Little positivity.
Good news, yeah. Well, we're going to get into a pretty long, pretty tough case. So our sources this week is a book called The Phantom Killer by James Presley, a Medium.com article, a Texas Psychiatry article, a Crime Wire article, and an article from the California Digital Newspaper Collection. So that kind of just had like a scan of like a newspaper. In 1946, 5 were murdered and 3 were injured by someone who would become known as the Phantom Killer. And the murders would become known as the Texarkana Moonlight murders, who targeted these 8 individuals. 77 years later, we still don't know. Still unsure. So Texarkana is in the far northwestern corner of Texas, and it also has like a sister city in Arkansas. So there's like a Texarkana, Texas, and a Texarkana, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of letters there. And each has their own like mayor, government, police, firemen, like they're their own separate entities. They're both like Texarkana. Kind of makes me think of like Bristol, like with Tennessee, like Virginia.
That
How it's like in
was,
both.
yeah, that was my exact like connection as well. That I was like, oh, like the same kind of, yeah.
And in 1946, Texarkana was experiencing a high number of crimes on both the Texas and Arkansas side. If you want a lot more detail about crime going on in 1946 in Texarkana, please go read The Phantom Killer. He goes into a lot of detail. Like, it is very informative to like paint the picture of like
Yeah.
what was happening in this town. But just a lot more crime than normal.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1946, America was still recovering from World War II that had ended in 1945. So many men are coming home. They're trying to readjust. Society's trying to figure out like what's their new normal? How do we adjust after this huge world war just ended? Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry met in February 1946. So he was 25 and she was 19. They were both married to other people, but they were both a part of like a wartime marriage that just like wasn't working out. Like I feel like we see this a lot like during war, like people get married really quickly because you're like, am I going to be enlisted and die? Is the world going to end?
Absolutely.
So you just kind of, you're like, let's get married right now.
And then everyone comes back and you're like, oh, maybe we should not have done this because we would not have done this if you were not going off to war right now.
Yeah. And while they were both awaiting their final divorce decrees, they felt free to date. So Jimmy was captivated by Mary Jean and asked her out on a date for February 22nd. So James Mack Hollis was born in 1920 in DeBock, Louisiana, which is a short drive from the Arkansas line. And months after his birth, his parents moved to El Dorado, Arkansas to open a general store and restaurant and just kind of profit from like the huge oil discovery that was happening like in the area. Jimmy did have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. So Jimmy's family eventually moved to California. So when the war came, he tried to join the Navy, but he did fail the physical exam due to a congenital heart defect. So he got a job in aircraft manufacturing in Fort Worth, Texas, because I feel like that's a lot. Like people were like, if I can't go fight, like let me just join, like let me start working somewhere that's like providing needs for the war.
Like still be a part of like the war effort like so many women did at that time because they weren't able to join and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was around this time he met and married his first wife, Dora Louise Nichols, in December 1942. And then they moved to El Dorado. So he was 22 and she was 19. And in January 1946, their marriage had come to an end and they separated. So he went to Texarkana, where his 2 brothers lived, and he got an apartment with his brother Bob and worked for a reliable life insurance company, and they lived on the Arkansas side. So Mary Jean Harris was born in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. I am 100% certain I butchered that. In 1927. And when the war boom came, her father took the family to Texarkana, finding a job at Red River Ordnance Depot. And then the family did eventually move to Hooks, which is just a city in Texas. And Mary Jean enrolled at Hooks High School. Mary Jean met Roland L. Larry, who was 18 in Texarkana, and married him in 1943. So Mary Jean listed her birthday as January 11th, 1925, which would have made her old enough to marry without parent permission, but she was actually 16, so she lied. She was actually born in 1927. She just kind of fudged the numbers on it. So the marriage was brief, and Roland went to the Navy, and by the time he returned, their marriage had basically deteriorated. So he left for college in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Yeah, there was a lot of city names.
What is with these Arkansas city names? Like,
there's so many that feel like so close to like big cities names that they were like Philadelphia, Arkadelphia.
It's like they're just like turned everything into like, oh, let's take all these like big cities and make it part of Arkansas. And it's kind of like it's like Disney World, and they're just like, we'll pretend that this is the real thing.
Yeah. So she remained in Hooks. It was an uncontested divorce and signed in January 1946. Soon after this, she met Jimmy Hollis. So they were going to go on a double date with his younger brother, Bob, and Virginia Lorraine Fairchild. Movies were very popular during this time, especially just looking for entertainment. Now that the war had ended, like a lot of people went to the movies, basically. And the four were going to see Three Strangers at the Paramount Theater. So the four left the theater around 9:45 p.m., and Jimmy drove them to a drive-in cafe. He then drove Bob and his date home, and Mary Jean lived in Hooks, which was about 20 minutes away. So he was going to have to drive her to Hooks to take her home. But on the way, they ended up like pulling off on a dirt road so they could talk. Jimmy eventually kind of got out of the car. They don't really know. Like the book was like, maybe he just wanted to look at the sky or whatever. Like we don't really know what possessed him to get out of the car, but he did. And that is when a flashlight's beam switched on him out of nowhere about 20 feet away. From around the light, he saw what appeared to be a pistol barrel aimed his way, backed up by a rough voice barking orders in a mean tone. Jimmy said the man seemed to be tall, like fairly young, and then the man told him to take his pants off. So Jimmy was kind of confused and stunned, like, why would I take my pants off? So the man moved closer, said he didn't want to kill him, to just do what he told. So Jimmy took off his pants. Then the man hit him on the head and knocked him to the ground. And he started like kicking him really hard, like really like beating him up. So Mary Jean thought she heard him being shot, but it was actually his skull cracking. Like that's how badly he was being beat up.
That's horrific.
So Mary Jean got out of the car and showed the man, like they had no money. She was like, we don't have anything, like chose the wrong people to rob. And then he hit her and she also fell to the ground. She got up and the man told her to run towards the road. So she was in high heels, so she tried to run the best she could. And then the man continued beating Jimmy on the ground. And eventually the man started chasing her. He hit her again and she fell to the ground again. The man took off her underwear and sexually assaulted her with his weapon. And eventually the man decided to leave. Possibly there was like headlights of another car driving by. So maybe he got spooked, decided to leave. And Mary Jean started to run and try to get help for Jimmy. And she found a house who called 911 for her. And at this same time, like Jimmy had regained consciousness back where he was by the car. And he was able to flag a car down for help. And he was like bleeding really heavily. And he like tried to get in the car. And the guy was like, no, don't get in my car. You're bleeding.
Oh.
He was like, no. And he was like, but I'll call an ambulance for you when I like get down the road. And I'm like,
it's like, who knows how long it's going to be before you get somewhere that can call an ambulance and how long an ambulance like took in those days. Ugh.
Yeah. Yikes. But thankfully an ambulance pulled up like at this time and a police officer from where Mary Jean had gotten to the house. So Jimmy was taken to the hospital, but he couldn't really remember any details of like the man or the car like that the man could have been in. And this attack could not have taken like more than 10 minutes. Like they think it was more likely 5 to 8 minutes. Like this whole attack happened, which was very brutal attack in a very short amount of time. So police investigated the scene. They tried to track down the assailant's route, and they did trace it to the house Mary Jean had fled from. So she possibly narrowly escaped from a second attack. Like it sounds like he may have been trying to follow her to like attack her again. And then they did follow his tracks eastward to Summerhill Road. And they did find Jimmy's pants about 100 yards from the scene of the attack. But overall, the culprit kind of made a clean getaway. Like he didn't really leave too much. They could kind of trace where he went, but nothing really that could point to who it was.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to interview both victims, but both were still in the hospital. And Jimmy would be for a few weeks. I mean, he was barely conscious. He was in critical condition. His skull had literally been cracked. It had actually been cracked in 3 places. And Mary Jean ended up having really deep cuts on her head that required 8 stitches. So she tried to be as helpful as she could. She said she didn't know who it was, but they had a white mask on, and she was convinced that he was Black based on her interpretation of the way he talked. So she was like, based on his voice, to me, this is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
So do with that information what you will.
Yeah.
15 days after the attack, Jimmy was well enough to go home. And once he got home, police interviewed him. Jimmy did the best he could, but he still couldn't really remember the person who attacked him. He said the man was tall and mean. He just seemed really angry, used vile words. Jimmy, however, believed he was a young white man, not over 30 years old. And Jimmy doesn't recall seeing a mask. So obviously, there's some discrepancies between their descriptions. I mean, kind of a big discrepancy if you can't agree on race.
Yeah.
And now it kind of made it difficult because it basically opened it up to any young man in the area. This description could apply to hundreds of men, not very descriptive at all. And officers were kind of torn on whether they believed Jimmy and Mary Jean didn't know the identity. So they were wondering, like, is she lying about his race to like cover for someone? So they kind of for a long time, some people may even still believe that like she knew who attacked them and she's been covering up for him, like them the whole time. And officers did kind of soon start to turn on them and would like interrogate them, ask them who they were covering for, like not really treating victims well.
Yeah.
So Mary Jean is obviously just shaken from this event and wants to move away from Texarkana. She was afraid that whoever the man was would pursue her and kill her, especially because, I mean, it's in the news, the attack. So she moved to Frederick, Oklahoma to live with an aunt. Jimmy also left Texarkana and moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. Jimmy really had hopes that him and Mary Jean could have a relationship, but it just didn't end up working out. I mean, that's how your first date ends. It's kind of, it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah.
Jimmy did eventually meet a woman named Addie Nell Thompson, and they got married. And his brother Bob actually did end up marrying Virginia, so that's who he was on the date with that night. Little progress was made in the case, and a little over a month later, another attack occurs. So Richard Lanier Griffin was 29 in 1946. He had served in the Navy during the war and made it out alive. He had 4 siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and his father had been a farmer. His father had been a tax collector for a while, but ultimately went back to farming in Cass County, Texas. So Richard had been a carpenter and cabinet maker before the war. And after Pearl Harbor, he went to Hawaii to help repair damage and help with new construction. And once he returned from Hawaii, that's when he decided to join the Navy and was welcomed into the Seabees. I don't really know what that is, but it sounds cool.
I was hoping you were going to clarify because I was like, what is that? But alas,
maybe someone will write in and tell us. I don't know. Maybe it's like, you know how like the Army also has Rangers? Maybe it's like the Navy have the Seabees. I don't know. Are you looking it up?
Okay, so this website says that the Navy Seabees focus their work on the completion of construction projects that serve combat and non-combat missions. And then something else says that they're like an elite group of engineers, that they aren't considered special forces like in the way we currently classify them by modern day definitions, but that they did make major specialized contributions to the U.S. military.
So that would make sense because like he was like a carpenter cabinet maker. Like he went and helped like new construction. So he was like sent to like a specific section of the Navy. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Glad we could clear that up.
Yeah. So Richard's father died in 1943 and his mother Bernice moved in with her daughter Eleanor in Texarkana. So once Richard was discharged from the Navy, he moved in with them as well. He also worked in Cass County, which was about 40 miles away. So he was usually only in Texarkana on the weekends. And in February 1946, he started dating Polly Ann Moore, who was also from Cass County. She was 17. So there was a 12-year age gap between them. Kind of a big age gap there.
That's a big, I mean, she's almost 18. It's the 40s, but, still a little
dicey. In the 40s, I don't think anyone would really bat an eye.
No.
I mean, 17 is like close to 8. Not justifying it, but like at least she, around that's was when people were getting married.
Yeah.
So Polly and her younger brother Mark were raised by her mother Lizzie after her father died when she was 8. So Polly attended Atlanta High School, and there is like an Atlanta, Texas, so don't think Atlanta, Georgia.
I thought it was going to be Arkansas just stealing more people's names, but I guess it's Texas this time.
It was Texas this time. Texas is the culprit this time.
Gotcha. Okay.
And she actually graduated in 1945 at the age of 16. So she was actually able to graduate early. She worked at the Red River Ordnance Depot, checking over inventory. And after the war, she moved to Texarkana with her mother's cousin. So on Saturday, March 23rd, Richard picked up Polly for a date. They've been together for 6 weeks now, and they were going to go to dinner, then to a movie. Richard and Polly met up with Richard's sister Eleanor and her boyfriend Jesse Proctor at the restaurant. So afterwards, the two couples went their separate ways, and Richard drove Polly back to her house because she'd spilled something like on her blouse, like she wanted to change before they went to the movie. So they then went to the Paramount Theater downtown to see a midnight movie, and they went to a cafe for an after-movie snack and left around 2 a.m. So before driving her home, Richard went to a dirt road about a half mile past the city limits, and it was a very, private area. And a while later, another car drove up, but they didn't really think too much of it because it was like a lover's lane spot. So like we've heard of lover's lane spots, like many people are going to come up and you just mind your own business,
Yeah.
However, this person did not mind their own business, and the intruder was upon them. He ordered Richard to drop his pants, and he did. The exact events cannot be known after this, but the gunman did shoot Richard and Polly. Richard was shot twice inside the car, and Polly was shot twice outside of the car on a blanket, so they could tell because her blood had soaked the blanket and like the ground underneath. There was no sign of sexual assault or beating, but the killer did move Polly's body into the car afterwards.
So the next morning at 9 a.m., someone drove by the car and thought it was odd to be like parked there that time of day. Like Courtney said, it was like a popular lover's lane spot, like usually not very crowded at 9 in the morning. So this person did stop, and that's when they saw the two people inside and realized that like they needed to contact police. So policemen sped to the scene and soon realized they were looking at a double murder, but they did have very little information to go on. It had rained after the murders, which washed away a lot of evidence. And then also it was 1946. So the officers and onlookers and everyone and their brother were just trampling over the scene. So that didn't really help with preserving any evidence that had been there to begin with. So a physician examined Polly's body and said that she had not been raped or sexually assaulted, but there was a mix-up and her body was sent to the funeral home, so there's no corroborating autopsy, which is like, again, the 40s. Like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Yeah. And then also we do know now that signs of sexual assault are not always obvious, like, on the body, so you can't really determine for sure, And
I think they thought it was weird if she'd been sexually assaulted that, like, she was dressed again. They were like, why would the killer like let her dress again? Like it didn't really make full sense.
I mean, I can see the conclusion that they came to, And an officer at the scene also said that Polly was still wearing a sanitary pad. So they're like, maybe this was why, like, she was not sexually assaulted because she was on her period and the rapist just didn't want to deal with that, is what their brains thought. But rumors of rape did spread for decades. This case, again, had very little evidence to go on. The bullets taken from Richard's skull, holes of bullets, and possible fingerprints from the car were the only clues. So the bullets had not been removed from Polly, but they did believe it was from the same gun, but they had no suspects and no motive. They were able to determine from the bullets that the murder weapon was a .32 automatic pistol with 6 lands and grooves with a left-hand twist and probably a Colt or similar make. So it's not an uncommon gun, likely something small and easy to conceal. So officers did post a $500 reward, which would be like $7,700 today. So that is a pretty good, amount for reward money, but no information came forward. And within 4 days, they had questioned over 50 people, but again, just had nothing coming out. And into April, there had been more than 200 false tips and leads followed. And Mary Jean heard of the murders in Oklahoma and was convinced they were connected. So she told officers, but they just didn't really listen. And again, believed that she was holding back information because she knew the attacker is what they thought. So they're like, you're saying now that these are connected, and they're still kind of stuck in that idea that she knew who it was, and so they couldn't be the same person.
Mm-hmm.
On Friday, April 12th, James Paul Martin borrowed his brother's car. So he lived in Kilgore, Texas, and was going to make the more than 100-mile trip to Texarkana. So Paul had many friends in Texarkana. He did grow up on the Arkansas side until he was 11, and his father died unexpectedly, so his mother did move them to Kilgore. And Paul had 3 older brothers who enlisted during the war, but Paul was too young to join. So he started working part-time in an ice plant and was going to be the plant's night engineer. So Paul arrived in Texarkana and was staying with his good friend Tom Albritton for the weekend. Sorry. And part of his plans included seeing Betty Jo Booker. So they had known each other for 10 years, and Betty Jo was 15 years old, and she was a junior. She was a very popular girl and a serious student, and she also played the saxophone in a local orchestra. She had won Miss Tiny Texarkana when she was a child. Her father had died when she was only 3, and then her older brother also died when he was 16, and Betty Jo was extremely close with her mother. So Paul wanted to take Betty Jo to a midnight movie at the Paramount, and they were supposed to have a double date with Tom and his date, Ramona Putnam, but Ramona had to be home earlier, so Tom walked her home and then went to bed. So Paul waited in his car for Betty Jo, who was unable to leave a prior event in time, so they were not able to make it to the midnight movie, and Betty Jo wanted to drop her saxophone off at home before they went anywhere. So Paul suggested that they drive to Spring Lake Park first and then drop off the saxophone. And then they could visit Betty Jo's friends for a while at a sleepover that she was supposed to go to. So they did park there for a while, and eventually a man approached them. So on April 14th at around 6 a.m., Mr. and Mrs. G.H. Weaver and their son left their home on the way to visit relatives. So they cut through along North Park Road, and they saw a form lying at the edge of an unpaved road. And it did look like a human body. And as they got closer, they confirmed it was the body of a boy lying on his left side, his head and trunk of his body on the leaves and grass. His feet and legs were on the dirt road. He was wearing a light-colored long-sleeve shirt, and his arms and hands were in front of him. So Weaver did not investigate, but did drive to the nearest home to call police. So police did try to be more careful with this crime scene. They could obviously see the boy was dead. He had been shot 4 times. 1 bullet had entered the back of the neck and emerged through the front of the skull, and another had entered through the left shoulder from the back. The 3rd was in his right hand, and the 4th was in his face. So officers searched the area for clues, but they didn't find much. They did find his car about a mile away, and they searched around and found a date book that belonged to Paul. They also found a used condom, but they did not retrieve it. So this was obviously the 40s, long before DNA, and it's also pretty common to find condoms around lovers' lane, so they didn't think it had anything to do with it. So once news got around about the murder, officers soon learned that Paul was supposed to have been with Betty Jo. They also learned that they were supposed to go to a party, but never showed up. So they got a search party together around 11:30 a.m. to search for Betty Jo. She was finally found about a mile away from Paul's body. She was fully clothed and had been shot twice, once in the heart and once in the head, entering the left cheek through her nose. The officer did admit that this murder was very similar to the Richard Griffin and Polly Moore murder, but it was a little different because of the body locations. So Richard and Polly were put back in their vehicle to be concealed, where Paul and Betty Jo were just left recklessly where they had been killed. So a little bit different. And news did spread quickly once the bodies were found. Which, Betty Jo's poor mother, I
know. She had already lost so much, and then lost her daughter too.
So it was widely rumored that Betty Jo had been raped, but this was widely debated. So some officers, like Courtney said earlier, believed that she was not because she had been fully dressed. So why would the killer redress her before killing her? But on April 20th, FBI lab results did reveal that a swab test of her vaginal passage was positive for male seminal secretion. So a saline solution wash of Paul's penis ruled out the possibility of intercourse between the couple. So we don't know what that means or how that works, but apparently they think that it wasn't him.
Yeah, I tried to look it up and be saline solution wash, and I don't know if this was something I don't know if that is something they would still consider accurate today.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't fully know what this means. Like, if they were trying to find any remnants of, you know, like semen on him and couldn't through the saline solution, could not find a single thing. But that's the science they used in 1946.
Yeah.
So don't know.
So yeah, apparently at that time, that meant that they did not think that Paul had had sex with Betty Jo. So they believe that the semen that was found in her body was from the killer. And in the same results, it did confirm that the same weapon was used in all 4 murders. And there were also 3 latent fingerprints that could not be explained. So again, officers have no suspects, so they're just like interviewing anyone they can, trying to figure out what happened. And as the media starts talking more about this story, we see for the first time now the killer referred to as the Phantom Killer or Phantom Slayer, and he is still known as this today. So while continuing to investigate Paul and Betty Jo's murder, they realized that her saxophone was missing. So they did release this information to the public in hopes that they could like find it and it would lead them to the killer. I mean, this is a pretty specific thing to have lost. Like it's not just a bracelet or like something that would be hard to find. It's like, that's pretty, what are you going to do with the saxophone? And if you take it somewhere to sell, people will remember it. It's a pretty good clue to go off of. So still lacking any suspects, officers tried to set up traps as well in order to catch the killer. So they would put officers in cars around the city at lovers' lanes. So they have cops inside, like disguised as couples, trying to like lure the killer into a trap. So they did this night after night, but it just didn't work. Citizens of Texarkana were on high alert. And as we see in a lot of these cases of multiple murders, people did start locking their doors, keeping knives or clubs nearby. And a lot of people went to buy handguns and rifles. And the reward fund did get up to $6,425, which is like $104,000 today. So a very big reward at this time for anyone who has information. So banks, businesses, and individual citizens are like all chipping in to help this reward fund because they want to find out who killed these 4 people. And teens in the area felt like they were being targeted and they were scared to go out alone. So they would only go to the movies in groups and they were no longer parking in cars. And the residents just grew restless as time went on. They also noticed that the murders had been exactly 3 weeks apart. So if the pattern continued, this meant that another murder would occur either May 4th or May 5th. And unfortunately, another murder did occur. So Virgil and Katie Starks had grown up together and known each other their whole lives. Virgil was only a few months older than Katie, and they had gone to school together. And in March of 1946, they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. So they both would turn 37 soon, and they didn't have any children. They lived on a farm. They lived on a family farm in Miller County, Arkansas, about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. They had lived there for about 5 years and both had very active social lives with friends and family. And Virgil also had a welding shop. So Friday, May 3rd was a busy day as usual. Virgil's back was acting up some. So after dinner, he was sitting with a heating pad while Katie put the dishes away. So he was reading the paper and listening to a radio program that he enjoyed. And Katie was getting ready for bed. And Virgil said he would be coming soon. Katie then heard something in the backyard, and it did turn out to be an intruder with a .22 automatic weapon standing just outside the window. So he shot twice and then fired through the screen and window at Virgil's head, and both shots went into the back of Virgil's head. So Katie didn't recognize the sound and just thought it was glass breaking at first. She thought Virgil had dropped something. So she went out into the living room, and that's when she saw the blood. She raced to the phone, but the killer remained outside the window and didn't attempt to flee.
And also in this time, it was kind of rare for them to have a phone in a rural farmhouse too. So a lot of people think maybe this is why the killer didn't cut the phone line or something, because he wasn't expecting them to actually have a phone, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So once she got to the phone, the killer shot twice more at her head. One bullet went into her cheek beside her nose and emerged from behind her ear, and the other shot entered her lower jaw just below the lip. So she fell to the floor stunned, but she was still alive. She knew the killer could see her, so she just dropped to the floor, hoping he would think she fell to the floor and was now dead. So she started to crawl toward the back of the house because she was trying to get to like the bedroom and hoping to find their gun that they kept. But while this was happening, she could see the intruder coming into the house through the kitchen window. So she decided, nope, I'm running. I'm getting out of here. I'm not even going to try anymore. So she did decide to try and run to her sister and brother-in-law's house, who lived just across the highway, only about 200 yards away. But unfortunately, they were not home. So she then tried to run to another neighbor's house. And once she reached the home of A.V. Prater, she knocked on the door and Prater answered. And he did help rush her to Texarkana to Michael Mager Hospital. And she was losing a lot of blood. I mean, she had been shot twice in the face. So she was whisked into the operating room as soon as she got there. So officers were notified and rushed to the Starks' house. The police entered the house to see if the killer was still there, and a fire had actually been started from a shot short-circuiting the heating pad that he was like laying on. So they were just like,
Wow.
walk in and he's dead, and like a fire's happening from the heating pad. But thankfully his body was like not burnt. Like they caught it quick enough that it could be like his body was mostly still intact.
Mm-hmm.
So officers tried to quickly rope off the house and preserve any clues, but of course, as more officers showed up, the scene was trampled very quickly. It's the 1940s. I mean, we saw this in the 1990s, so it's
right.
Yeah. And there really was no way to know which direction the killer had gone or where he was now. So motive again for the murders was hard to find. Money in the house was not bothered. Katie's purse lay on a bed in full view with money and jewels. Nothing's missing. It's possible his goal was to rob the house and he fled once he saw Katie leave, but it doesn't really seem plausible. They did find some bloody shoe prints that belonged to the killer in the house. And the killer had also dropped a red flashlight outside in the hedge beneath the window. So they knew the weapon was a .22 caliber and the shoe print appeared to be a size 10. However, there were a lot of officers in and out of the crime scene, so people looking back at it today are like, what if that didn't belong to the killer at all? What if that was just an officer's shoe print? Like,
yeah, because it's like if you're not taking the time to like really preserve the evidence, it's like, how would you know when that got there?
Yeah. So officers had remembered a suspicious car parked close to the Starks' home. They believed he'd like parked by some railroad tracks across from the house, like across the street from the house, and then walked to the house. So they did find like footprints in the ground, but it was kind of hard to pull a print just from like mud. And it's also, again, does it belong to the killer or is it just a red herring? And they did believe whoever like did it probably would have had muddy or damp footwear that night. Like their boots when they came home may have needed to be discarded or were kind of gross. They also found several cigarette butts near where the suspicious car was parked. But again, they don't know if this belonged to the killer, but maybe it could have indicated he was there. Like, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
So officers eventually interviewed Katie in the hospital. Unfortunately, she could not remember anything about the man who shot her. Arkansas State Police's forensic lab confirmed that the .22 caliber gun that killed Virgil was an automatic or semi-automatic weapon, but the bullets were in too bad of condition to determine if it was like from a rifle or a pistol. So it's like they're not really sure. And the FBI forensic lab was unable to obtain any fingerprints on the flashlight or its batteries, which I thought was like really like smart. They were like, we don't know if we'll get it like from the flashlight because it's like been out, but maybe the killer, when he put the batteries in the flashlight, there'd be a fingerprint on those.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, did not. Nothing there. And the flashlight,
I mean, it's a good thought, though. You know, it's a good strategy
for the 40s. I mean, yeah, it's great
for sure.
Good trying. The flashlight did seem unique, so they tried to check every store in Texarkana. Only one store actually sold the brand, but they didn't remember selling that particular one. So the Gazette newspaper tried to run it to see if anyone recognized it, but nothing came from it. So Virgil Stark's murder added a new urgency to the case. It reminded the public this case was still unsolved. You know, every 3 weeks we're having an attack. A citizen is dying. something's happening. And authorities believe that the similarities to the other cases meant it was the same killer. So the attack on the Starks appeared to be impulsive. Again, they still didn't think robbery's the motive. Just seemed like he wanted to go in, attack, and kill everyone in the house. Because if you're just going to rob, like, why wouldn't you just like threaten them at gunpoint? Why would you try to kill them before you even came in?
Yeah.
And every victim had also been shot 2 times, besides Paul Martin, who had been shot 4 times, but like twice at the same time, so like 2 shots each time. Virgil was also shot in the back of the head, similar to Richard and Polly. However, there's still differences. So the Starks attack was with a different gun. They were in their house and not a lover's lane, and they were older than the other victims. A lot of people like still believe this was the Phantom Killer, and like he only changed like these details to evade arrest. Like, as we said, cops are putting up stings at lovers' lanes, and like teens were just not even going there. So maybe he just like switched because he had to, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, that would make a lot of sense, especially I think it's pretty safe to assume this is probably someone local to the area or, you know, is around and so would be hearing like the town gossip of, oh, the kids aren't going there anymore, or this is what people are thinking about the murders, and you can like change your, you know, tactic based on the information you're getting. So that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And Dr. Anthony LaPala, a psychiatrist at the Texarkana Federal Correctional Institution, tried to offer some insight into the crimes. So he did believe the same man had committed all of the crimes. He thought he was planning something like as unexpected as the Starks attack, and that he might lay low for a while, but would commit another crime. So he's like, I don't think he's done, and he might switch up again, like what he's going to do. So he thought the man to be middle-aged with a strong sex drive, a sadist. He thought he was intelligent and clever. He said people like this are rarely caught. And he thinks the murderer knew what was going on in investigations, which is why he chose to attack the home rather than Lover's Lane. So he also felt the man was white and very dangerous. So Texarkana is still on edge. Who's the murderer? When and where at this point is he going to strike again? So police started receiving a lot of calls in the middle of the night about gunshots when it was actually just like cars backfiring. So like everyone's calling over every little thing because they're just so on edge.
Yeah, definitely.
So police tried to monitor different hangout spots by teens to keep them safe. Like they like started telling them like, hey, go hang out at this diner. That's a safe diner because we're watching it. Like kind of like safe places for them to hang out. And more than 1,300 suspects were interviewed and eliminated. So they keep hoping just for a lucky break. So 3 weeks was approaching, which is the killer's pattern, but nothing happened. A month passed and then 6 weeks. Slowly, summer came with no further attacks, and Texarkana started to loosen up. Couples started returning to lover lanes. And as far as we know, there are no more confirmed attacks by the Phantom Killer after this. So none that they could connect to this set. So it's been 77 years. So as you can expect, there's been quite a few suspects.
A few theories. I do wonder though, before we get into these, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this somewhere because I did not read your section of the notes before we got started. Do you think it's possible that the killer, like, I mean, if it was the same killer that did these 3 sets and the last set was very different because he was like changing up his tactic, could he have continued to change it up so much that they did not realize that it was the same person, or like go to a different area? You know what I mean?
I think it's possible, but they have nothing to really confirm it.
Yeah.
There is one more death that will occur that they either think it is the Phantom Killer or a victim of the Phantom Killer.
Yeah.
But they don't really know. I mean, we do have the psychiatrist saying like this guy is not going to stop. So something big would have had to stop him, like getting arrested, or maybe like he did move to a different section. But as far as I can tell, they've never seen like in another city enough to connect it.
Yeah. That was just what I was thinking, like if he had changed it up after, the first two, and then did he continue to do so much so that like he wouldn't even be recognizable as the same kind of pattern? Anyway, that's just a random thought that was thrown out there.
It is kind of possible. I have seen another theory that'll come up on who this could be. Okay. So there have been many suspects over the years, and one was a man named Yule Sweeney. So he was a car thief and a counterfeiter. So he came onto police's radar when Jim Mays, who's an old farmer in Pike County, called the state police about a man who hadn't paid rent. So he hadn't paid his rent in weeks, so Jim was just over it. He was like, I'm sick of this man. Calls the police. And he was able to give the tenant's license plate number. So he drove a light green 1941 Plymouth sedan with Arkansas plates. And they ran a check on the car and realized this car had actually been stolen on March 24th, which I'll remind you is the weekend of Richard and Polly's murders. So Yule Sweeney was now facing a felony, but officers were unable to locate him. So they tried to speak to the family, and they eventually actually got a lead from the 5-year-old son of one of his family members. Like the boy just like remembered, like Sweeney always like said he parked his car in this like specific parking lot. I don't know why kids remember the weirdest things. Like they latch on to some weird stuff sometimes.
Very true. That does not surprise me at all.
Yeah. So they were like, okay, well, that's more of a lead than we have anywhere else. So they didn't find it immediately, but they did do frequent checks on the lot. And finally, one day in June, an officer actually spotted the car. But a tall, slender woman in her 20s appeared and claimed the car. So the officer stopped and arrested her, and her name was Penny Louise Stevens Sweeney. And it was actually her wedding day. She had just returned from Shreveport, Louisiana, where she and Yule Lee Sweeney had married a few hours earlier. So if you know anything about investigations, being married is not a great sign.
Yep.
So she was 21 and a resident of Texarkana, Texas. And she said she had no idea where he was at that time. She did tell officers some of his habits. She said he did like to spend a lot of time at theaters, and he like would step out to smoke, and he loved to like watch other people. As you remember, a lot of these people had gone to the movies right before or around the time of their deaths. So Yule was 29 on their wedding day, and their marriage license said he was born in Arkadelphia, Arkansas on February 9th, 1917. And on July 15th in Atlanta, Texas, Sweeney approached a car lot and tried to sell them a Plymouth that had like no title on it. So they got a weird feeling because they were like, why is this man trying to sell a car without a title? Like,
yeah, like
wait. I'm sure if you work on a car lot, you see that a lot where you're like,
you
sketch.
Suspicious.
So they wrote the license plate number down, and they called the police station to notify them and give them the license plate number. And they ran the plates, and the car had been stolen in Pampa. Nope, I did not say that wrong. Pampa.
I cannot with.
And it's in the far off Texas panhandle. So yeah. So many names in this, so many cities in this story. I'm like,
it's like the Great Value brand over here.
It literally sounds like I'm dumb when I did this research and was like, Pampa, Arkadelphia. Like, oh
my gosh.
Are y'all okay over there in Texas, Arkansas? Are y'all okay?
Apparently not. I don't. Please, our Texan and our Arkansan listeners. Is that right?
I don't know. Arkansan? Why does it change Arkansas, Arkansas? Anyway,
if you guys live there, please let us know what y'all doing with your city names, please.
Yeah,
thank you.
So they finally found him and arrested him. And when they arrested him, he asked, "What do you think they'll do to me for this? Will they give me the chair?" He also later asked, "Do you think I would be lucky enough to get out in 25 years?" So officers were kind of like, "This is odd." Like, one, if you're innocent, you'd be like, why did you arrest me?
Yeah.
But also, like, if you think you're just arrested for car theft, like, you would maybe get like 5 years. Like, why do you think you're going to get the electric chair?
Yeah, exactly.
So the FBI intervened in the case pretty quickly. So since Texarkana is on state lines, if it crosses over, immediately jurisdiction. So Sweeney did admit to stealing 3 cars, and soon after his arrest, they started wondering if he had any connection to the Phantom killings. A lawyer visited Peggy and told her that Sweeney was being held for murder, and she said, "How did they find out?" Oh.
Oh, okay.
So Peggy and Sweeney, why can't I say his name anymore? So sick of him. So Peggy and Yule were writing letters back and forth in jail, and Peggy wrote at one point, "I haven't mentioned anything about the watches or rings." So they're like, what watches, what rings, what's going on?
Yeah.
So they interviewed Peggy about where Yule was during the dates of the murder, and he had no firm alibi during the times of the murder, but by her account, he was in Texarkana. So she was like, I do believe he was in Texarkana at those times. And she'd also mentioned several stolen cars and implicated him on many felonies in regards to theft and armed robbery, but not murder. And in a second statement, Peggy spoke a little bit more about Yule. She said that after the Paul and Betty Jo murders, they were talking and she was saying she wondered who did it. And he said somebody with a brilliant mind and more sense than the cops. She said he admitted to having Betty Jo's saxophone taken like from the car. And he said a man had given it to him. Like, I didn't take it. A man just gave it to me. And she said they had been near Spring Lake Park on April 13th. She said he left the car for a while and sped off when he came back. So she's just getting him closer and closer. She's like, Texarkana, Spring Lake Park. He was in a car. like
he was very near the area, you know? And in her third statement, she elaborated even more. So she said when they went to Spring Lake Park that he was going to go out and rob someone. Apparently he saw a car with a couple and said like, oh, they look like they have money. So she said they drove about 200 yards past the couple and then Sweeney stopped the car. He said he wanted her to go with him. So they got up to the couple and Sweeney has a gun at this point. She said the couple got out of the car and Sweeney told Peggy to search them. She's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So then she said the couple was like begging them not to kill them. And she said that Sweeney got mad and shot the boy twice. And after he fell to the ground, he went through his pockets and took what money he had left. And Sweeney ordered the girl to get in the car. So he told Peggy that he tried to get some from the girl and then he killed her and then went through their car. So Sweeney's clothes were all bloody, so he had to change in a restroom. So she said the couple then headed to Dallas, and on the way there, they set his clothes on fire. I mean, just like, girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. He also told Peggy that he discarded the gun, but Peggy refused to sign her statement. So she said that Sweeney would kill her. And so while Peggy had implicated them, like some of her details didn't match up perfectly. So Paul had been shot 4 times, but like she only cited 2. So, you know, was her memory impaired or was she like purposefully holding something back? But after this statement, police tried to locate the site where he had burned his clothes, but they didn't have any success. And officers did take Peggy to the Spring Lake Park, and she did guide them to where Paul's car had been parked. They asked her if Sweeney had taken anything else from the boy's pockets, and she said that he took some papers and then threw them in the bushes. So Officer Bill Presley did find Paul's date book on the day of the murders, and he found it exactly where Peggy indicated that Sweeney had thrown it. And this detail was not known like by the papers or anyone else. And overall, Peggy's story just really lines up with the crime scene. So they did wonder if any discrepancies or holes in the story were like her way of kind of lessening her involvement of like, I'll tell you a little bit, but I don't want to tell you too much because now I'm just getting myself in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But as Courtney alluded to earlier, the biggest problem with Peggy's statement is that she is Sweeney's wife. So she is not legally obligated to testify against him, but he is now the prime suspect. So looking into his childhood, they saw that he was the child of neglectful parents who got divorced when he was 9. The family moved around a lot, and his arrest record started at a young age with various thefts. One of his first arrests was actually at age 12, and he was also arrested for possession of and attempting to pass counterfeit nickels. He was constantly being arrested for various charges throughout the years, and his crimes did slowly escalate from theft to armed robbery and larceny. So in terms of evidence, there was mostly just Peggy's statement, but they did find a pair of Sweeney's shoes. They had been put up damp and had mildew on them, and they couldn't accurately match them like to the shoe prints from the Stark scene. There were a few other statements from family and friends as well. So his sister, Maxine Whetstone, said at one point she was looking through his clothes and found a shirt that had the name Stark on it. So she mentioned it to her husband, Wade, who always thought that, like, he was responsible for the murders, which, like, such a weird thing to think about your brother-in-law, but okay. And so Wade took it to the police, and Katie was shown the shirt and initially thought it did belong to Virgil, but then, like, after further thought, she's like, I'm just not really positive. So there's a lot more information in general, like, about Yul Sweeney in this book, but, we just don't want to dive too much into him because we don't really know either way at this point.
Yeah.
So in October, Betty Jo's saxophone was found. It was actually about 140 steps from where her body had been found, and her stepfather did confirm it was hers. So around this time, Peggy made a fourth statement under a polygraph. She did say that she saw Paul shot 4 times and said the saxophone was placed exactly where it was found. So again, her details are lining up with the actual murders, and they said they're not giving her any details, which we also know may not be true at all.
Especially because she was like, oh, he had the saxophone, and then it was like, oh, he never had it. Like, the saxophone was over here. I'm like, you weren't leading her even just a little bit on that
and
one.
Like, she initially said Paul was shot twice, and now she's saying 4 times, and I'm like, you guys probably told her that, or probably asked enough leading questions to make her say that.
Yeah.
But Peggy did sign this statement, but police did believe she was being deceptive and holding something back in her statement. So in January 1947, Sweeney did go to trial for multiple felony thefts. He was found guilty, and since this was his 3rd felony conviction, his punishment was enhanced, and the jury did recommend life in prison. The judge had formally sentenced him to life imprisonment, but after numerous appeals, he was able to be released in October of 1973. So 4 days later, he violated parole and was sentenced to 2 more years in prison. And Sweeney did eventually die in 1994. He was never tried for the Texarkana murders, and they never found any concrete evidence tying him to the crimes, but there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. So while Yul Sweeney is probably like the top of the suspect list for most people, there are still a few other suspects who have been discussed over the years. So another is H.B. Tennyson, who went by Duty. So he was 18 when he died by suicide in November of 1948. And in his suicide note, he claimed to be the Phantom Killer. He had written a few notes before his death, and one was titled The Final Word. And this was his official suicide note that he intended to be for the public, like as his final word. And a letter was also found within his boxes that contained the confession. They think it was likely written between October 30th and November 4th, which was the day he died. And in this note, he said, why did I take my own life? Well, when you committed 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and killed Mr. Starks and tried to get Mrs. Starks. You wouldn't have guessed it. I did it when Mother was either out or asleep, and no one saw me do it. For the guns, I disassembled them and discarded them in different places. However, in his final note, he did say to disregard any other note, kind of like he was like retracting his statements, but pretty interesting that he would write that in the first place. And as far as connections, Duty did play in the marching band with Betty Jo before she moved. And Duty and Katie Stark's sister-in-law lived on the same street, and one of Duty's friends was a neighbor. So not like super strong connections, but, a few things here that kind of line up. And a friend of Duty's also provided him an alibi for the night of the Stark attacks, saying they were playing cards together when they heard the news. So we do know a lot of people falsely confess for reasons we will probably never know, and maybe Duty didn't expect anyone to ever read this confession note, or he died by suicide. He could have had some other mental illness going on that was not recognized in the 40s. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Another suspect is Ralph Bauman. So Ralph was 21 years old and an ex-Army Air Force machine gunner. And he told the police that he thinks he may be the Phantom Killer, but he wanted to find out if he is. Okay. Yes. So he said he was discharged from the Air Force as a psychoneurotic in 1945. and then said that he entered a coma in March and didn't wake up until May 3rd. And by coma, he meant that he was just like in this dissociative state. Like he's not physically.
Yeah, he's not like in a hospital in a coma. He's like, he just doesn't remember anything.
Yeah, for like 2 months. So he said he then heard of the killer that matched his description, and he had apparently been in anger and outrage at the Paramount Theater before his coma, and then when he like awoke from this coma, I hope you can hear all of my quotation marks, he realized that his rifle was missing. So police did arrest him, but his account of the murders just did not match up, and there was no evidence that Ralph Bauman was the Phantom Killer. So another suspect was Sammy. So Sammy is a pseudonym given to a longtime Texarkana resident with a good reputation. His vehicle's tire tracks were found across the road from Paul's body, and he did fail a polygraph test. So they put him under hypnosis, and a psychiatrist determined that he had no criminal tendencies. Apparently, he had only pulled over on the road to like stop and pee. He was also having an affair with a married woman, which could be why he failed the polygraph test. Like he's like, I have something to hide. I'm stressed about something. And police did eventually clear him as a suspect. So another interesting person that comes up in this case is Earl McSpadden. So he is considered possibly a sixth victim by some, and to others, possibly the murderer himself. So Earl was found on Kansas City railway tracks. He was lying face down. It was discovered that he had been killed with a sharp object and then placed on the tracks. So some believe that this could have been the Phantom Killer and that Earl was murdered, and others believe that Earl was the Phantom Killer and that he died by suicide on the tracks after everything that he had done. So there have also been countless people who were thought to be suspicious and then cleared, and the other list of suspects truly just goes on. Like, is this a taxi driver or some unknown hitchhiker like coming in and out of town? There's even an article wondering if the Phantom Killer is also the Zodiac Killer, which could explain,
lovers' lanes. Like, did he just adjust? Like you were saying, did he just adjust? I mean, maybe he just popped up again as a Zodiac.
I mean, they're very, very similar crimes, and who knows what he was doing in those years in between? I don't know. I mean, it's really just unknown. Yul Sweeney does seem like the strongest suspect, and a lot of people are convinced that it was him. But again, who knows? So a movie was made in 1976 called The Town That Dreaded Sundown that was loosely based on the Moonlight murders. There was also a remake in 2014. And in 2007, the band The Bad Detectives recorded the song Texarkana Moonlight, which is about these crimes. The Texarkana Moonlight murders shook Texarkana, but the murderer left almost as quickly as he came. And those are the murders of Richard Griffin, Polly Ann Moore, Paul Martin, Betty Jo Booker, and Virgil Starks, as well as the attacks of Jimmy Hollis, Mary Jean Larry, and Katie Starks. Wow.
Yeah. A crazy one, an absolutely crazy one. Like, who did it? And the book heavily believes that Yul Sweeney is responsible. So there is a lot of information that like points to him. But it's again like his wife saying it was him, family and friends being suspicious. Like there's nothing like, it's all circumstantial, and it's
that's the
not
thing. Like most of the evidence against him is just his wife's statements. Like that's and who knows where she's at mentally. Like who knows what is going on with her, and a lot of the details do match up, but like we said, how much of that was police feeding it to her? Like how much was her like reciting what she's read on the news, and then they're kind of filling in the other details that don't exactly match? Or maybe it was him. I mean, we don't know, but I don't think it's definitive that that's who it was just because she had this information, especially being so long ago and not really being able to know like what investigative techniques were used, what, forensic interviewing. There's obviously like no recorded tapes of these interviews and things to know what was said, but I don't know. It's so similar to the Zodiac. It's crazy. Like,
yeah, I know. Like when I saw that article, I was like connected, and I was like, well, I mean, Yul Sweeney was let out in like the 70s, so maybe he just moved to San Francisco. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to implicate him into. I'm not going to implicate him into in case.
Did we just solve the Zodiac?
We did. We solved
again
it.
for the how many times?
Done. No, but just crazy. And again, is it just someone who was just coming through, stayed in town for a few months, did all this, and then moved on and maybe did it somewhere else? Or honestly, like, I obviously hope this is solved, but I honestly don't know how it would be being this old. There really is no DNA evidence at all. I mean,
I wonder too.
It's crazy.
I wonder too if it's like, you know, like he did it to like these 3 couples here, and then like you said, like he moved on, but like is he doing it like one per town to where there's never this connection made? You know, if you just have this random couple shot and killed and then nothing else in that same town, people aren't looking into like other similar murders in other towns or states or anything. So it's like, could this person have just done this all over the country? And we don't know about any of those because it was just this single or double murder, single situation, couple, whatever. And then there's not a ton of information about it because this happens a lot. And if you don't have something to like link it as like, oh, this is a serial killer, like, is it getting that kind of media coverage? You know, did he like,
what if
realize his
none
mistake?
of them are connected?
Oh, that's
what if it was just high crime and like all the attacks were by somebody different?
Yeah. I mean, the third one is very different from the first 2. So,
but
yeah,
it's hard to tell. No one fully knows.
Let us know what you guys think. Let us know your theories, who you think is responsible for this. And in the meantime, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
My perk of the week is that 10 years ago, little Courtney got her first tattoo with her best friend. And it was cute before it started fading, and then it faded very, very harshly. And the purple whale soon looked blue, and it was basically coming off. And then suddenly I go with Jacqueline for her to get a tattoo with no plans of getting one of my own. And we get the whale touched up because the tattoo artist was like, you want me to fix that for you? And we said, let's go.
Please do. Give him a little facelift while you're at it.
I have a side story that's really funny about this as well. Because I was like telling Kevin, I was like, yeah, like Jacqueline, like she just made it like her birthday present to me or whatever. And he was like, a month and a half early? Like, why would you give a birthday present a month and a half early? Like, he was being super judgy. Then we went to my friend Tiffany's house to watch the Love is Blind, like, live reunion. And she was like, okay, I got you a birthday present and I just can't hold on to it anymore, and gave it to me. And I was just like looking at Kevin being like, well, look at that. I got 2 in one weekend.
It's because men don't think about birthdays until the day before, and they're like, oh shit, yeah, I'm supposed to do something for that. Versus women, I mean, not like I planned this, obviously, but
yeah, it was very impulsive, but
yeah, we'll pretend like it was.
Well, as I was telling Kevin, I was like, I mean, it just came up and it was like, well, I mean, what else is she gonna get me? I mean, there we go.
Like
then she doesn't have to worry about it.
When you reach a certain point, it's like, what do you need? And like every few years, you know, like something will come up where it's like, oh yeah, like but then sometimes it's just like, I don't know. What do you, so, you know, something like that comes out that's like, oh yeah, let me just do this for your birthday. Perfect. Done.
But it cracked me up how he was just like acting so judgy about it, just being like, what in the world? And then I show up and got another birthday present. Like,
that is so funny. You're like, I get 2 birthday weekends this year. It's great.
Yes. But basically we got our whales touched up and they are so stinking cute now. They are like, what?
So cute. We'll share a picture with you guys because I know you guys care.
Yeah, we'll do it before and after. Because it's just, what
do you have any like recent pictures? Because I know we have the before of like when we got it 10 years ago, but like how bad it looked now. Like I don't have any.
I don't think I have any because I don't think I was trying to take pictures of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I wish we had gotten a before and after because it's so cool.
And the tattoo artist was so talented and just drew it on
literally
Jacqueline's ankle and then drew it on, freehanded it, and then freehanded it on mine, just remembering what he'd already drawn on Jacqueline's. And they're identical. Like they look exactly the same. He didn't like look at my, like after mine was done, like it was wrapped up and done. And then he just freehanded Courtney's the same way. It was wild. Yeah. It was insane. But the whales got a much needed facelift and now they're so cute and I can't wait to show it off once it's healed. Yes. It's looking a little rough right now. Okay, glad yours is looking a little rough too, because mine's there's like a piece of the purple that's like in like the belly part that there's supposed to be no color. And I think it's just a flake. And every time I wash it, I try to And it's still there, and it's annoying me.
It'll come off eventually because you're not supposed to pick it, so it's like
right?
You gotta wait for it to. Yeah, it'll come off for sure.
So I was just like, every time I wash it, I just give that a little extra 2 rubs, and then
we'll get it.
Like, come on. But a little crusty right now, but it's gonna be so cute once it heals. But
definitely.
That is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
I mean, obviously, my perk of the week is also my 2 new tattoos because we went for me to get 1 tattoo and then ended up getting our others touched up. Touched up just sounds so. It's more than touched up. Like they got a much revitalized.
It's a facelift. It's a whole new tattoo, basically.
Yeah, it really is. It looks completely different, but so cute, and it's an evolution of our lives and our. Anyway, so we went originally for me to get my new tattoo of the lily of the valley, which is the like birth month flower for the month that my daughter was born. So it's super cute. And then during it, we found out that the artist had no other appointments that day. And we're like, well, shit, we're here. Do you want to do this? And then, we did it.
He saw our whales and was like, I can't let these girls leave with that on their ankle anymore.
He's like, that is horrific. But also I love how all of our matching tattoos, which are now counting as 3, I'm just going to count them as 3, have been impulsive. Like there's been
true.
We have not
no planned
any of them. So I just love that for us.
Yeah. Exciting times.
Yes. But we, like I said, once they get healed, or I guess we can post the original picture too after they were freshly done, but we'll share a picture with you guys because I know you want to see our lovely whale facelift after 10 years. Let us know about your tattoos. Let us know who you think is responsible for these murders. If you guys know of other murders out there that you think could be connected to this one, let us know. That could be an interesting little spin-off episode of other.
If we forgot anything, because there was a lot of information in the book, and maybe there's something that you're like, this is the most important detail of this entire case, and you did not mention it. Let us know, and we'll mention it on the next one after we fact check it and make sure it's true.
Yes. So you guys know where to find us on all of the things. We're also on patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, where we have 30 something bonuses. I don't even know at this point.
And one coming out this Thursday, all about Jacqueline. I will interview Jacqueline and ask her all the hard pressed questions.
Yeah. So if you guys want to learn all about me, everyone's like, I'm literally not going to ever subscribe to that because. But
we could do like truth or drink. Like I pick the questions, and then if you don't want to answer, you have to take a sip. But then it's not going to be long enough. But that would be fun still.
I mean, that would be fun, but also I literally hide nothing, so I don't know how.
That's true. What we'll do one month is we'll have a Patreon meetup, and we'll all get together and play truth or drink. So that'll be a night for an hour or so where we all ask, you can ask us questions. And if it's too personal, we'll take a drink, or we'll ask you questions, whatever. That'd be fun.
That sounds super fun. Yeah. So sign up for that. We'll let you know when that's coming. Yeah. I think I already gave the address. It's patreon.com/caffeinated crimes. And again, you know where to find us on all the other platforms. It's in the show notes, or you can just Google Caffeinated Crimes Podcast, and I'm sure you'll find us everywhere there too.
Yeah, and don't forget, we're coming to CrimeCon in September. Also, be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you can subscribe, give 5 stars. That would be excellent. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.